Let's call today's meeting to order. Madam Clerk, could we please take roll?
Yes, Mr. Chair. Mr. Kelly.
Here.
Mr. McKenna.
Present.
Ms. Pallison. Here. Mr. Goodstein.
Here.
Ms. Wynn-Pearson. Here. You have a 5-board quorum.
Oh.
5-member board quorum.
First time for
First time in forever. Approval of the agenda. I hate to say it, I've got to take my son to a doctor's appointment, so I need to leave around 20 of. So D, Lisa, is there stuff that's more urgent or would be best done before I leave, or?
Probably just the opinions, like the 49th state.
Okay.
But could I also bring up a change to the agenda that might influence this?
Sure.
That is the 7B, the miscellaneous transition question. That's actually been turned into, in my back pocket, a request for advisory opinion by an employee about post-employment restrictions.
Okay.
He would like to come at 3 o'clock. So
okay.
you'll be gone.
I'll be gone.
But just to be aware of that. And I thought that we should do the 49th state age-old one. But I wondered also, just a discussion of a requirement of an advisory opinion. I think your input would be helpful. That's 7A. Okay.
Okay, so
See,
should,
if I might, what about the confidential request? Is that one important to get to?
Okay, which confident? We have a couple.
2021-3.
Is that the San Francisco one?
Yes.
Okay. And that would take 10 minutes, 5 minutes.
okay, so what do you suggest? Should we do 6A and B
And then
first, and then
7A?
maybe 7A, and then see where we are?
That should pretty much do it.
Okay. Does anyone have any objections to that?
Yes, there's a motion to move 6A and B and 7A to the start of the agenda and then just restart from there.
Okay. Any objections? All right, hearing no objections, we'll do that then. And so let's do it. So let's take a look at 6A, 49 state angel fund. Now I'm trying to think. Oh, now do.
Yeah. I know it's been a while, huh?
This is one Marcia started out with, and you were supposed to jump in, and then I was supposed to jump in to make you jump in. Lisa did it.
And finally, this is the usual. This is sort of the usual way things go. I trickle down until either D gets it or Lisa gets it done. But as a procedural matter, who was here when we did this? Asia, were you here?
I think Asia was here. I don't believe so.
Asia, so it's just Jack and I. So what do you think? Do we have a quorum to vote on it, or can the board just sort of consider it now?
I think the board can consider it. Am I wrong about that?
The opinion was never approved.
Yeah.
So the board can take it up as your comprise now.
Good. Okay. So
you guys probably want to read it.
can everyone take a couple of minutes?
Unless you disagree.
Oh.
Is there anything additional on the record other than what I saw the initial request, but is there any further documentation in the record that we should review before laying out the opinion?
That's a good
I don't
question.
think anything else was submitted, but the initial request.
There was.
We had some questions from them, so there was
Yeah.
some oral presentations.
Well, there was oral.
Yeah.
Becky, there was, I probably have it upstairs. There actually was an opinion request. There was a written opinion request.
Well, I think that was in the record, right? Because I saw in the packet that went out when I saw
Yeah.
over email, there was an
Let's grab
opinion
it.
request, and then there was a request from Todd, right? And then there was an appended email summary of the issue, right? Is there anything more than that?
I will say this much. So I went through, this is one of those that my brain wasn't particularly engaged when we were talking about this one because I knew Marcia was going to be trying it. I had the taxi cab one, so I was kind of focused on that one. And when I went back and I listened to the discussion, there definitely was, from the conversation that we had with Mr. Morrison and Mr. Trimble, they did clarify pretty substantially the information in the request for advisory opinion, or it was an email from Joe to D, and then D turned that into just a request, which was basically attaching the email. And there was a pretty significant change in how Mr. Trimble's involvement was presented. Initially, it sounded like, and I wrote this in the opinion request, I tried to clarify in the facts. The way it was originally presented was that he was going to be, and I kind of quoted what they said, that he would likely either advise or help as part of the MOA team to conduct research, engage stakeholders, and create a proposed investment structure for a Green Bay. But it became very clear at the meeting that Mr. Trimmel's like, no, I'm not doing any of that. I'm just giving data. He's the largest solar integrator in Alaska, and he has a lot of data about, you know, the extent of the solar industry in Alaska, the value. I think it was just.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes.
Because that's giving the facts.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
But it sounds like there's enough on the record that for any of our newer members to participate, they would need to listen to that. Then there wouldn't be a quorum issue. So, because you're saying, is there just, there's testimony, right? But is there
Yes.
also additional written materials?
I didn't see any. I
Okay.
thought it was
So
like
there's additional
There's
testimony.
additional testimony, which sounds like it was pretty substantial.
Yeah, there were two
Facts.
meetings, Becky. We had, the first meeting was on like the 11th of June, and we talked about it and another advisory opinion, and then it was our first meeting after everything got shut down. And then we had a special meeting called on the 18th of June, and we took that issue up again because at least I think we were under the impression that there was some time sensitivity to it. And we talked about it again. So there are two recordings that I listened to, and then the email, but other than that, it was fairly, that was where I got the factual information, was from that request and the testimony. So
So I think we should make a
feel.
request if the clerk would send those recordings to three people just to listen to briefly. The 49th State Investment Group is very difficult to understand, investment lingo, but listen in and see this.
With
So I
that
think
said,
we need to do that.
I think with that said, it is kind of a complicated structure, but I don't think that really understanding all the details of that are necessary to understand kind of the issue that was before us. So anyway, that's just, the testimony didn't go into, elaborate on all the details of the investment structure. But anyway, I thought that they were very important in terms of characterizing the facts accurately in this.
Chair, I would suggest we don't have a quorum at this point, that we need other people to have read the materials.
Well, isn't it enough if the chair? Don't I count as like two?
You do?
Really, in some ways. So should we postpone this to our next meeting then?
That would be my recommendation.
Do we have a motion to do so, to postpone consideration and voting on?
I'll make that motion.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Opposed, say aye.
What did you just say?
Opposed, say
aye.
Oh, no, those in favor say aye. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no? Okay, very good. So we'll consider that in our July meeting then. Very good.
We have a lot of practice, Terry.
I know, right?
Do we still have time sensitivity, or are we gonna run into something with the request?
I don't think there's time sensitivity at this point.
Okay.
I mean, it's a year old.
Oh,
I
got it.
think
Yeah.
we rendered them oral advice at the time.
Okay.
Yeah, we did, yes.
Again, then unfortunately went through a couple of people to get to here.
Got it, understood.
Good. Well, let's take a look at 2021-3. Oh, and this one's is this still confidential?
This is confidential, so yeah, we'll have to go back.
Okay. Do we have a motion to move into executive session?
So moved.
Any objections? Okay, hearing no objections, let's move into executive session, please.
You're recording an open session.
Okay, well, we just had a fantastic discussion about advisory opinion 2021-3, and now we're going to move on.
Do we need to do anything with 2020-2? We discussed that one.
I think we delayed, we voted to postpone that to our next meeting.
Okay, we should put that on the record.
Oh, we were in open session.
We were?
Yeah, regular.
Madam Clerk, were we in open session when we did
Yes, Mr. Chair, Ms. McPherson made a motion to postpone consideration. Mr. McKenna seconded.
that? Okay. All right.
Although because Becky wasn't probably part of our quorum, a different person might have made that motion, but the result is quite the same.
That's all right. We'll pick it up, Ursula. Yeah, I'm getting used
If
to
we can confuse something.
I'm still having trouble being in meetings not wearing pajama pants. it's very.
What's the record reflect?
Very restricting. My outdoor clothes.
Your smart pants.
My uncomfortable pants.
Terry, this is what I sleep in all the time.
Those are your pajamas. All right, well, let's take a look at 7A then. This is a requirement for advisory opinion. D?
And I mentioned that because, even the one we dealt with today, or let's take when Forrest came in, and he just walked in the room and said, I want to see if I have a conflict when I do as an assembly member the budget. and I also sit on the Parks Foundation board. And so we talked, and he didn't file anything. We talked to him for about 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and then it was, okay, I would write something up. Well, number one, it wasn't too formal, so I didn't write something up immediately, but when I finally did, I found a whole code section that we had missed. So when people just come in, the downside is that we're certainly not as prepared, because when people bring opinions here, I at least, and I think Lisa too, we try to scout for which of the code sections, give it some preliminary thoughts, do some fact checking. You know, like, I think on that one I may have called OMB Lance Wilbur and asked a little bit. But so that not only resulted in no opinion, and who knows, we could have missed the other code section anyway, it wasn't obvious. But the other side of this is people do want to walk in, like the next person coming in, which now I'm filing as confidential, or request for advisory. You'll see when that person comes in, that probably could have been an informal opinion as well. And I think where the formality of opinions started was the clerk, Barbara Jones, has said adamantly, no, if people come in, they need to do a request for advisory opinion. You know, we've given a lot of people have just stopped in and we've talked about their situation. I think that if we allow people to do that, and I'm personally in favor, but if we allow people to do that, then number one, they don't get confidentiality because it's on a tape. So if they want confidentiality, they have to go through the process. So I think that's the big one, that they don't get confidentiality. And then they also shouldn't be able to rely on what we tell them informally. So those two things. If we say, well, that's okay, and half the people who file with the ethics board come to me first anyway, and I say, okay, here's going to be your consequence. If you don't file a request for advisory opinion, no confidentiality, and you can't rely on it. Because some people just do want informal advice. And the other side of it for us is we did this a tremendous amount of work for writing these opinions, and I have some suggestions about opinion writing after this conversation. So anyway, I wanted to bring that up because, again, here's another person coming up at 3 who probably could have just asked us informally. I'm not sure it needs to be a whole opinion. So some the board should discuss that. I mean, it doesn't say yes you can or no you can't in the code. I guess we should look at the advisory code and make sure. But Barbara Jones had a very strong opinion on this, that people should not appear here without doing a request for advisory. And again, that's probably from the past group. I don't know what the purpose of that is. And it's 150 is that.
Hey, Dee, being new here, so you're saying that there's sort of like 2 ways of doing this, formal and informal advisory.
Well, there used to only be advisory and complaints.
Okay.
And then what I'm suggesting advisory, does it only go by the advisory guidelines here for writing a formal written request for advisory opinion?
Yeah.
Or can there be this informal portion? Because some of the people used to love walking in and asking us questions.
So when you say informal, it's someone not writing.
Exactly.
Doctors come in and say, hey, verbally, we need some help on something.
Sort of the way, I mean, like, it's sort of like the board acting as an ethics officer. All sorts of people will go to D, and as long as it's not particularly controversial, she's like, oh, here's what the code requires you to do. And then that's the end of it. Nothing ever gets written up. Maybe there's an email at the most. So we've had more and more, assembly members just dropping by saying, hey, I've got this problem. What do you think about this, and that? Well, we talked about it for a while.
Who don't want something written. Because I thought I was confused if coming here is the backstop where you get something written so that you were like,
Right, there's no paper.
I'm going to do this thing. Here, I've talked to the ethics board and they've concurred with that this is appropriate. But we're getting more people who just want to talk it out and don't want the written thing. Okay. I don't see under 115, 150 necessarily. It feels like under 115, 150E, we could exercise our discretion in responding to a request for an advisory opinion. Based on the considerations in 115, 116A, that's confusing to me.
So then it points to the reasons that we can dismiss an ethics complaint, and there's that whole list of things under 2A2.
Yeah.
So for the same reason as we would dismiss a complaint from 2A through G, we can also choose not to write an advisory opinion.
I think those are very separated, the opinions and the complaint.
But it's
weird.
referring to.
Yeah, it's cross-referenced to
written.
115, 160A and 150.
It explicitly references
Oh,
it.
okay.
Yeah.
It almost seems like the board may exercise discretion in responding to requests for an advisory opinion by like saying it should be an ethics, but I mean, but that doesn't, the cross-reference is
It's weird.
strange.
Well, and when there are many of us here who rewrote this code, this was one where we simply, and mostly me, they had, a request for an ethics opinion and then this huge complaint thing with due process and this and that, and we never did any of that, and we were not capable of investigations, and so we basically just kept two very truncated short processes. So I don't think there was any more intent involved in that. It was get rid of that huge onerous complaint process, because we're in fact not capable of doing it anyway. So just so you know, there wasn't much more thought than that involved in this.
So the advisory opinion section, I'm probably missing this, it doesn't say that this has to be a written request, does it?
I imagine Harvard's relying on ads, right? That promote preventative instruction and advice. The board shall publish on the municipal website advisory opinions in a generic form.
Right, but the request doesn't have to be written.
Oh yeah, no, but isn't the issue the response? Like
Yeah, it says shall
they don't care about
provide.
asking in writing. They just want to talk it over with us as opposed to getting a full written response back, right?
You might think of that, you can request an advisory opinion, or you can request some advice.
Right,
An
it's like a
advisory
new
opinion is a very
category.
formal document,
Right,
right?
it's very-
It requires a very specific formal document. to
And that,
request
this
it.
contemplates a concise written statement. Presumably that concise written statement does not have to be published because it's not an advisory opinion. So there's actually sort of two questions here. Do we want to allow people to come in and make a informal oral request, or it's got to be in writing? And then on our end, do we want to occasionally provide this concise written statement instead of a whole advisory opinion?
That would help.
Or like, could we do that? Could we say we've discussed the issue with so-and-so and we declined to issue a formal written statement but to provide verbal advice, and that could be our concise written statement?
The verbal advice is a concise written statement.
No, the concise written statement is the summary of the fact that we gave concise written
Oh.
advice. So it just says we have to issue
It's
a
really
concise
sorry,
written
guys.
statement.
I think
Decline
I have
to
too
issue
many
an advisory
words.
opinion, so our concise written statement could be delivered, we have relayed oral advice and thus declined to issue a written advisory opinion.
But I think these are, I mean, like, I would agree that I wouldn't want people to be able to rely on that the way the code envisions, right? The code, reliance is based on a formal process in which we give a formal opinion. For all sorts of reasons, I think it would be unwise to let people do that with oral advice that we give sort of off the cuff. They happen to come in and we think about, because we could miss stuff. They could be, not remembered correctly or remembered differently about what advice was actually given.
Do you think it'd be
things like
helpful
that.
then to have like a G that just says informal advice? That way we're not sort of outside our enumerated powers.
Yeah,
Conservative
I
here,
would
right? To be
I
like,
would be fine,
let's, to explicitly give people a place where they can come in and hang their hat and say, I'm just asking for some informal advice, but I know I can't rely on it, right? It's very explicit.
And it's not confidential.
And it's not confidential.
I wouldn't mind the confidential. Like when people ask you stuff as an ethics officer, you
Well, first, I
kind of
don't ever.
presume it's
Well,
confidential.
actually, I do write things. I often say, "This is infirm. You asked this, and here's what I say." I mean, it's usually 3 to 5 lines. I make it very brief, but enough to show that they came and talked to me about a specific code thing. Maybe I put a line or two of facts, but it's very brief. But I do tell them that. Well, so I guess that's not particularly. Well, it's not confidential because I'm not attorney-client to them. I'm acting as an ethics officer.
Is there another provision of the code about what the ethics officer does? Because this is about the
Sure
board,
it is, yeah.
right? And when someone is seeking advice from the board, to me, it's potentially different if someone comes to you, Dee, as the ethics advisor for informal.
I'm in there somewhere because Terry was trying to curtail my powers.
That's not.
So while Dee looks at that, I have another question. If it's informal advice, are we expected to remember it after we get it?
It feels to me like we either could get we could either get a G, right, and create ourselves a formal pathway for informal advice, or we could shoehorn it into the existing code and say the structure is you submitted a request for advice, you've come to talk to us, and then you have declined to receive a formal, so you basically rescinded your request for a formal advisory opinion, and then we issue a statement that says we responded to your request and you've rescinded your request for an advisory opinion. Like period, we basically kind of state that we are not issuing opinions, but allow them the benefit of talking to us. So
Or we
it
just
doesn't
tell
need
them-
to either way.
We may not even have to do that if we go what you're saying, and
Yeah.
they say I'm withdrawing the request now.
Yeah.
Like-
You know, one of the concerns I have about that, I just think about one particular opinion.
Yeah.
Dee, you're going to remember
Foreclosure.
one. Yeah, and Dee's like, no, I really want an advisory opinion here. I don't want this person to come in and not
Well,
like
then
the
you have
advice
power
that
to
he
do
gets,
that.
Yeah,
and then
that's true.
decide I don't want it in writing, and therefore it's not out there for the world as like as if the
But you
advice
still
was
have the
out
power
there.
even in this paradigm, right? Like you could say, the person could come in and say, I want an advisory opinion. We say, these are our thoughts, and they say, never mind, I don't need a formal opinion. This has been a sufficient conversation with me. And you say, no, I have the power. I want this writing. This is important for precedent. We then have to write an advisory opinion.
Well, then do I have to file a new request for?
Because then are you the
No.
requester?
You would, yeah.
Probably, yes.
Yeah.
Because it would be handed to you.
What if we sort of, well, I don't know if this is doable, what if we sort of parse it out and we say, okay, if you want informal advice, you go to the ethics officer. And then that gives you the power, if you don't feel comfortable giving them informal advice, to bring the issue to the board as a request for opinion. Is that right?
That's somewhat what's going
What
on
you do,
now.
yeah.
Because,
Okay.
and so the next person will be coming in. Really, I don't think there's any, well, I don't know whether it'd be helpful or not. He came to me for informal. I said, oh, this is probably a good thing for the board to discuss.
Mhm.
So I'm the one that's generally saying, I think the board will give you some interesting insight on this. But so far, we forced it through me having to file a request for advisory opinion, which then means all these other steps, all this additional
Mhm.
time. Although I like Becky's point that, or someone who said, in here, it doesn't necessarily say we have to do writing. And also to Terry's point, it does say here somewhere, a request for advice is confidential unless confidentiality is waived. So maybe that means is, even on the informal thing, they get confidentiality. I think is where you were going to.
I think so.
I just
You think that?
I think that's totally true. I think they get confidentiality unless they waive
Even
it.
if it's informal,
Even if-
regardless of whether they file a little piece of paper.
The thing I don't like about telling someone they can come here for informal confidential advice is then they have the power to say, I don't want this discussion to be memorialized in any way. I'd rather give us that power. So we can tell people, look, you can come before the board informally, in the sense that you could come, orally make your pitch and we can talk about it and stuff. But the board will be the one that decides if that results in an advisory opinion or at least a concise written statement. And that gives us some control over what we memorialize. Because I'm concerned otherwise they come in here for a confidential, informal request. We talk about it. It's confidential, so it's it's not public. They leave and do whatever they're going to do based on that, and there's sort of no record of that.
We
ever-
also don't record that, right?
Yeah, we don't
It's
record
confidential.
it.
Because that feels like maybe we do need a G, because then it would be, if you want informal advice, it has to be not confidential and on the record in order to preserve the ability to have some kind
Yeah,
of
that's good.
integrity. Because then you have the recording. So, because my worry is we give advice and then someone's like, well, I didn't hear you say it was a bad idea.
Right.
I heard
That's
you say it was
misunderstood.
exactly.
Right.
You just had maybe some concerns with it, So.
We could do it in an executive session, right? That might split the difference. So we could say, look, if you want to have a little bit more of a.
But that's not recorded. Oh.
It is, executive session. It's only secret
Oh.
deliberative session, that's not.
That would always be.
But it's
So we
just
would,
separate, and
we would
you
have a
have to-
recording, but then we would still, people would still be encouraged to come in by saying, look, you could have a conversation about this without it being in full public meeting. But there would still be a recording of it, and so if there was disagreement later about what was said and what advice was offered to you, we would have it recorded.
So Becky, you are actually executive session expert.
I know, I was just thinking about that. Like,
Yeah.
what did I say about executive session? The
The-
tapes shall remain confidential until any matter under deliberation. Like,
Well,
has
and
been
do we even
resolved.
have a basis for executive? And I think we do because it's confidential. But we're making it confidential to support our reasons for having executive.
Well, I mean, it would depend on if we do this via a code. I feel like this is like leading to a code edit, in which case you could, in the code, say this qualifies for executive session. Because isn't there a catch-all in the executive session section of the code that says like any other reason specified in the code?
Yeah,
can be-
there's a savings clause.
Yeah.
I get, so wait, what's our goal here? To allow people to come in and give sort of some oral presentation informally, or to give people advice without that advice being written down and memorialized? Because I think what we do depends on what we're trying to accomplish.
I thought the goal was that what kind of gatekeeper is D for this?
And frankly, I'm very comfortable telling people that if you want confidentiality or to rely on it, you have to do a formal request for advisory opinion. I'm fine with that. That's sort of simple, I think it comports with the code. Is the other question is, can I have people come here who've talked to me briefly, and I said, oh no, it's a great idea to go to the board. can we have an informal discussion with that group, or that person? I don't know, maybe we leave it at what I've been doing, that if you come to the board, if you want confidentiality, that you can get informal advice, but then it's not confidential and you can't rely on it.
Well, I like it. I like it when people come, and I like kind of lowering the paperwork and barriers to people coming. I just want to make sure, that we don't, that it doesn't get abused, right? And we've had at least one situation, right, where someone kind of came and was like fishing for advice, and they were not planning on using that advice
All the more reason
in
to
an
keep it on
ethically
the
productive
record.
way, right?
Yeah.
And so.
But you also, I think, like you're saying, you want to encourage people to come in and talk more rather than less, right? We want to have people seeking advice rather than feeling like it's too formal and they don't want to engage in the process.
And that's why I don't even mind if we could protect ourselves and figure out some way of doing it. I wouldn't even mind saying, come and we'll go in executive session, so you don't have to do it even in open session. Tell us what's going on. Feel free to kind of tell us what's happening, and we can give you advice. And maybe if it ultimately needs to be a formal opinion for your own protection or for precedent or what have you. But again, I think I'd rather encourage people to come than not come, right? Or to say, well, the only way you get advice from us is a highly formalized process, or it's informal, but it's wide open in the middle of a public meeting.
What's the incentive for folks to not ask for a formal advisory opinion?
Say that.
What is the incentive for them to not ask for that? I mean, I know that we would probably say, well, it's going to take more time for us to get an advisory opinion, but really shouldn't necessarily take all that long. I'm just trying to understand what's the real incentive for them to do that. I mean, if I were coming in for informal, for advice, I'd probably say, oh, formalize it, let's get an opinion, I can rely on it, it's confidential.
Over the years, we've had a few people come in informally like this, for somebody saying I don't think there's a red flag here, but I just want to run it by you, so I don't think it's
Yeah.
worth the time and energy to go through the formal process and everything. Unless you see a red flag. If you see a red flag and you think there's something, even in appearance, that looks bad, then I would want that protection.
Yeah.
But otherwise, I wouldn't. If you think, oh no, there's nothing really controversial here, then I'm happy to just go with it. So we've had those folks.
I think maybe we could, if we're not going to do a code rewrite, maybe we could look at this concise written statement a little more closely and do something with that. So if someone comes in here, because there's nothing in here that says that
Where are you? Back in
Yeah, back at 115, 150, about we can exercise discretion in responding to a request for an advisory opinion. So,
Sorry.
go.
Carry on the best you can, okay?
Who's
Don't
our
be
vice
afraid.
chair?
I believe
Who's our vice chair? Yeah.
That's Jack.
That's Jack.
Jack is our guy.
I'll try.
Fair wind and following seas.
Yeah. You want to catch
No.
that? I mean, that's the key,
That's-
sure.
that's the
I can't wield that power responsibly.
Feels unintended.
Certainly comes to me.
Since there's nothing that says that a person has to request an advisory opinion in writing, we still allow people to come in, talk to us, and then if they at that point say, hey, I don't want an advisory opinion, or we don't think it's rises to the occasion of an advisory opinion, it seems like we potentially have that discretion to issue this concise written statement. We could say, person X came before the board, we generally discuss, maybe we make it very general, we discussed issues of conflict, potential conflicts of interest, and I don't know, we could even say an informal advice was good. I don't know, I mean, the concise written statement, I think, would give us both power and wiggle room to respond to these. And I don't have a problem with people coming in informally. And I think that a person could then the question is, could the person rely on that?
Do we do those for deliberative or in executive? When someone comes in and someone came in under the auspices of, I've asked for a written opinion, but I've asked for advisory opinion, but I'd like to discuss it informally before I determine whether I want a written opinion. Do we do that off the record completely?
I don't think we have.
We would do it we would still
Yeah, I
record it.
don't think that's been clear.
'Cause that's the one piece is I think that's the easiest and simplest solution to the code, provided we record that conversation with the individual. Because if we do it off the record, then we run into this problem where they've gotten informal advice from us and
I agree.
they maybe misrepresent it or don't remember it or something down the road.
Wouldn't that be
Yeah.
an executive session for things that might impact their reputation?
Under general executive session rules versus.
Well, it may depend on if we are going to allow them to decide whether or not to request confidentiality. I mean, it may be that they don't care if it's an open session, but if they want, I think our problem is if someone wants informal confidential advice.
I don't think we do that. I just don't think we should give informal confidential advice. I think we should
Seems
make
like
it.
a end around a process.
Yeah.
Unless we want to write
The only
something where they're not
concern-
entitled to rely on it.
I mean, it feels like we can only do that if we, informal confidential advice, I feel like the structure of the code would be, someone comes in with a request for advisory opinion that is confidential, they haven't paid confidentiality, they talk to us about it, they say, all right, Mrs. Lunk, as an issue, I rescind my request but then what we would issue is a concise written statement that says, we considered this advisory request, we have declined to issue any statement, and hereby issue no opinion on this issue or on this question that can be relied upon, or something. We have to have some sort of like disclaimer language in our response that is like, you can't rely on our advice, even though we gave it to you
Yeah.
orally.
But we could do that. We'd still have a record of
Yeah.
it, not an open record, but we'd be an executive. They would have requested confidentiality, so we'd be an executive but not deliberative session.
I think so, yes.
So there'd be a record of it.
So there'd be a
record
record
of it.
or there'd be a recorded
For our
record.
purposes.
And then we would give them a written record that says, you can't rely on anything we told you.
Yeah. I like
I
that.
think there's some weirdness, you guys, just in terms of like, my personal view is, looking at things as a whole and trying
She
to
wasn't paying any
inject
attention.
like reason into this. There is something weird to me about the way E is written. If we were to say that the first sentence, the board may exercise discretion in responding to a request for an advisory opinion based on the considerations in 1.15160A, those are all, I'm a little concerned about us making a decision to not write an opinion based on something other than those factors. Because
But
those
one of those
factors
factors is if the allegations of truth fail to constitute a violation of the code of ethics.
Yeah.
So we could only do that if they came in and said, we're gonna do this thing, I wanna do this thing, and we said, it's absolutely a violation
These
of the
things
code of
don't
ethics.
really fit. I mean, if we
Yeah.
just say, well, we don't really feel like writing an opinion.
Can do it anyway.
Yeah.
If we
You're like,
just-
never mind, I don't want a written opinion.
I know, I guess what I'm saying
I
is
wish
just
these
not
reasons
wanting
were
to
so
write an
blunt.
opinion doesn't seem to fit in these factors. And
Yeah,
I
it
know
seems
we
like the
could,
only reason we could do that is if the person comes in with, if the fact pattern is, I come in, do you guys see any red flags at all? And we say, no red flags at all. That to me falls under 115, 160A to G, right? We say, allegations, your fact pattern, if true, does not constitute violation of code of ethics, so we
Yeah,
decline,
that's
we
true.
decline to write an opinion. We've talked to you and we decline to do something in writing.
But it's even trivial under D.
Yeah.
But
the
it-
problem
yeah.
is we don't know that.
Yes, right. But
And then we're like,
yes.
no, what you're gonna do is really bad, and we are gonna write about it for everyone.
But I don't think we should allow that fact pattern. If someone comes in and gives us a fact pattern that we're like, that is definitely a violation of the code of ethics, like, we should allow them to be like, never mind, don't write it down.
Yeah.
Send it back away.
that which isn't written.
So
is
then
not
what
true.
would that become though? Would that
That
then
would
go to
become-
E?
That would become an anonymous written
Well,
advisory
but-
opinion.
That would
you'd
become the
say-
board deciding they want, that we are gonna.
And I guess I can always follow an
Yeah.
opinion, request for opinion based on the facts, et cetera.
Well, can I say that just because they can find a pathway doesn't mean that we should, right? Because we're gonna have to explain all this to each person that comes in
Right.
about
Yeah.
where we're at in terms of whether we're recording them, not recording them, whether we're in executive or deliberative session. I mean, that's a lot. I'm not a lawyer. I'm barely following the conversation. We can't expect everyone
Yeah, I
else to
think
follow
that's
that
right.
conversation.
I mean, really, right?
It's also going to be really difficult from a record keeping
Yeah.
standpoint.
How big of an issue is this? Like, why don't we just, is it really a resource issue for you in terms of?
I think
like,
it's more reason, well,
you wanna
same for
have
the
a-
board.
yeah.
I mean, the board's just, the reality is the board has taken its own sweet time to get some opinions
Months to
out.
get these opinions out.
The opinion that I gave to you guys today is a year old. I mean, I finally decided to write it because I'm like, it has someone else.
Okay, but
But
that
we
was
didn't
really an
really do it.
exception, that
It-
wasn't an informal one, it was difficult, and we went
Sometimes
through
they take a while,
board
too.
members who left.
Yeah.
Versus the other confidential one we did today about the trip. Was that, I don't know.
That was just
that was
that-
a formal
that was-
request.
Yeah.
Well, maybe after the next one, who should be coming in any time, it'll help clarify this. I am
So
concerned
now,
about board
but now I'm hearing a
resources.
new issue, and that is the timing of our.
It just can't take a while.
And so is that like I mean, it may be easier to have someone like Dee be sort of like the gatekeeper, because then someone can formally go to her and she can give them a response based off of precedents or the rules right away. If
But you
she's-
already are.
You already
Yeah,
do.
which
It's
already
more
is,
like
which she's
that.
already
I
doing.
mean, these are the situations where you're like, I want somebody else to weigh in.
Yeah.
Yeah,
because
yeah.
I don't want to be
Or
the only one.
I wouldn't mind making a decision, but I think it would be more helpful for you to hear other
Other
opinions,
viewpoints.
other viewpoints. And I think it's fine. I'd be glad to stamp it. I think it's fine.
Well, maybe we
No.
just need to make the advisory opinions sometimes a little bit shorter. I mean, maybe that's the solution. Maybe we just don't.
Then, can I bring up my new topic, which is opinion writing?
Wait, can I
This is your agenda.
Yeah, can I just
know.
Can I say just one thing real quick? We
That's a
have
good
been
suggestion, though.
we have been giving people. We've also sort of been giving people informal pre-advice before the advisory opinion comes out, right? If it's
Right.
taking a long time
Yeah,
for the
so-
advisory. Okay, so people are like being allowed to
Yeah.
Well, no, they can
act on our response.
We do that for you.
Okay,
Okay.
okay, that's what I just
That's
wanted to
helpful to hear, yeah.
That was
The other
my
thing,
question.
though, about opinion writing, we'll just throw that in for 5 minutes before a new person comes in here, is what we do is we all discuss it, and then whoever seems most passionate would say, oh, good, can you write the opinion? Meanwhile, you haven't taken notes, you haven't done any of that. I think myself and another missing member who has recently left the room don't get anything done, ever. I mean, just, let's forget it. But this assigning things to people at the end of a meeting is just silly. I would rather see if we did a rotation, and I might be part of that rotation, that we rotate. And I thought, well, something that was very helpful for Eurasia, you jumped in right away on that one Bill Falsey thing. You just jumped right into it. And you sent me a draft, and so I and Lisa went and worked with you on the draft. So before it got to the meeting, number one, it was timely, we remembered the conversation. But number two is it really, I thought, helped you out. And not all people are an administrative hearing officer who writes opinions. I mean, I don't even write like that. And so, but so that people don't feel intimidated to in that rotation, that if you're, okay, this one that's coming in, you're going to be the person writing, so pay attention, take notes. Although you can get the tape recorder, and then feel free to send it, especially if you write it in a week or two. Send it to Lisa and I. Then what we redid about half of your opinion, right? We went back and forth, until it was actually a very good opinion. But Aisha saved us total time and memory, and she had a framework for the writing. So it was invaluable as well. But I think we're getting at this backlog because people don't have time, but also assigning people at the end of the day, depending on their enthusiasm in that discussion, is not the way to go. That we, at the beginning of the meeting, should say, okay, you're up, can you do that? Now, if you say, hey, for the next 6 weeks, I can't, that's fine.
I like your idea too of having someone who's like, I remember that one with Aisha wrote the table, take a look at it.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, Aisha did all this work and it was easy. She had someone to talk to you about it. It's nice to have someone to talk to.
It really is, and I also
Talk to
at the
about
time
it.
happened to have the time,
Yeah.
and it was like good to know that I had.
Yeah.
Because really, I can't imagine going back and doing one of these like months later. I mean, I still had to, I think, go listen to the transcript because I just didn't know anything about it at that point. But I think that would be
It's hard.
easier. Maybe if we did a rotation amongst the board members with, drafting or editing help from the two
right
of
away.
you.
That was easy for us to do.
Is this
And-
next one coming in going to be an advisory opinion?
Yes.
Who wants to be?
It's a silly. You're happy to do yet another one?
Oh, good.
Okay.
You sure? You've been doing a lot for us. Like,
I have, but and I will say this, here's one thing about advisory opinions. They're unbelievably helpful when you're writing advisory opinions, like your GMOS one. That was completely useful for the 49th state. And I mean, I go back to our old ones all the time. They've saved a lot of work.
yeah.
It's a lot of utility and the things that are on the website. Our old opinions are super useful. So it's value in having advisory opinions from us. And consistency in the way that we analyze them.
Well, and then institutional knowledge. I mean, Terry and I, and also Becky, are going to remember past opinions. So Terry and I go back further and we'll say, oh, don't we need to look at that? Some of the older opinions, many of them are under the old code, but they still have elements.
I like the idea of rotation, and maybe we, with a goal
Feels
of,
fair.
you can skip your turn in the rotation, and then you're up next, and everyone, I don't know how many we usually issue, but say everyone needs to do 1 a year, 2 a year, I don't know, so it all evens out in the end, but it seems doable.
And I think that we should, though, if okay, you're assigned this, that the expectation is that it will be done before the next meeting. Because if you want editing help, and I think, again, the few that Lisa and I have teamed up on, we were very timely because we were so thrilled that someone else wrote one of these. I mean, we were very good about it. But that there's an expectation that you will get it done and not like some of us. postpone it for a year at a time.
Okay.
So.
I think that makes sense. I mean, it's just it's a practice thing, but I think it makes sense. Avery, what do you think?
Yeah, I've never before. Happy to try.
Becky?
Yeah, that's fine. It's a great idea. Or-
Terry says yes.
It's like easier to mentally prepare too if I'm like, all right, I want to schedule for this.
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I got it, right? As opposed
No,
to being like,
agreed.
oh.
Yeah.
That's 100% right.
Yeah.
Like, what do we say?
But the
Can
other
I
thing
do
is
this one? I
paying
don't know.
attention to what's going on in that
I'm
discussion.
taking notes too.
Yeah, that is a huge piece.
Yeah.
It's funny to see the binders again. I was looking through like all these pages of notes that I haven't seen for like a year and a half. Thank you. It's like, oh, look at all this. So how do we feel about the agenda item for requirement of advisory opinion? Did we come to some sort of understanding on that?
I sure did.
I mean, I honestly feel like it's probably better for us to write an advisory opinion unless the person does elect to formally withdraw it, just as opposed to setting the precedent that you can just come to bat around things, with the idea that we have a more resource or a more scheduled resource to write advisory opinions. I could see narrow exceptions where someone says, I just want to bounce this off you, and we're all like, oh, it's totally fine. Why would we write this down? But that seems to fall into the code. But I don't know what you guys think. That's just my opinion.
I think that it's good with the caveat that sometimes I think Dee a few times has said, I will write this, but it's going to be 2 paragraphs. And I think we can do that.
Yeah,
for
we
a lot
can just
of
do a
them.
really
Or do
short
something
one.
short for a lot of them.
Okay.
I know. I think that works.
Do those still get posted? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm a short one.
Okay. Yeah, I think that makes sense. And
So when
so
someone, I was just saying, so when someone comes in and says, Dee, how about this? And I say, I think it'd be great if you went to the ethics board for some additional input. Because it's always better than just me. I will be telling them that there can be an opinion or concise summary unless they withdraw their request.
After the
Or-
discussion.
After discussion, or the board feels that it merits education or something.
And can they come in and do this orally instead of in writing? Is that the other question?
I think we should let them do
Do
that.
people always put their request for advisory opinion in writing, or they, I thought they
I do.
come in.
I mean, that's the problem. The administration is now trained that if they ask me a question, I'll put in a request for them so they have to
But
get it.
it's on behalf, because it does require to be personal to the inquirer. So I sort of see you as being like the conduit.
Yeah.
But they're the one making the request.
It's just that one form, right?
Yeah.
I see
Jennifer,
somebody
did you have
always
something
does
to?
Well, I just want to mention to the board, since we're talking about posting on the website, as a practical matter, I have not been putting the confidential responses on the website. So I didn't know there was a requirement to do that. If we need to do that, I mean, we need help from the board to scrub some of those responses.
Okay. All right. I think we circle back around until this person shows up to 4A. Did we approve the meeting minutes from last time? Okay.
Are they in here?
They're right behind the minutes for this one. They look good to me.
Yep. I move to approve the minutes for April 21st.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye.
I think I have to abstain.
Yes,
Yes.
we're there. All right.
But I abstain.
So the minutes from the April 21 meeting are approved. Is this our?
Yes.
All right. Would this be under 7B?
Yes.
All right. I'll make a motion to modify the agenda and move to 7B next.
And did I give you that, the request for advisory you have here? Yeah.
Yes,
let me read
but
it.
we'll need to.
Let me just read it. Yes. And because it's a request for advisory, we would go into.
Is it going to be confidentiality? Right?
Yes, it's confidential at the time, for now.
Okay, so we have a request for advisory opinion that's going to be confidential. Do we have a motion to go into executive session?
So moved.
Second?
Anyone opposed? All right. First, we should address the confidentiality of, are we going to call this request for advisory opinion 2021-4? Is that what this is? Okay.
Okay, and this is Dennis. I filed it as the deputy municipal attorney, and I hereby waive confidentiality.
All right. So is there a motion in relation to what to do with regards to a request for advisory opinion 2021-4?
I would move that Lisa draft a brief advisory opinion specifying that we do not find there to be any conflict of interest related to employment by the assembly, that we do not find there to be any conflict of interest related to work on the matters specified in 115-130A, starting with including a case proceeding application, not including consideration of ordinances, resolutions, charter amendments, etc., and further advising that Sproxet return to the board if we would like to have future fact-specific situations reviewed for a more specific opinion. Is that all? Okay.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion passes.
Thank you, guys.
It was nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice meeting you too.
Also an attorney. We're very attorney-heavy group here.
We're very, very happy.
All right, I think we're on to the consent agenda.
Thanks, Jason.
And I think all we have is the disclosure of economic interests under Forest. Have people had a chance to take a look at those? They're behind the meeting minutes from April 21. Was it David Whiting where all the signatures were different every time?
Yes.
And now they're
Yes.
Have you been through this before, what this is? Do you mind if I?
No, please.
Employees in different groups, but employees in this particular group of the ASD are required to disclose if them or a member of their immediate family gets a contract with the city to see if there's any conflict. So, there's a teacher and who obviously ASD and husband, a non-ASD person, is getting a contract to provide rental instruments to the band. Is that a conflict? Well, generally, not if that teacher teaches social studies. If maybe there's more direct, but what happens is that the school district has their own little policy, and Mr. Whiting, who's their senior director, is excellent. I mean, he's very on top of things, and so they file a form where he has to sign off and say, I don't think there is a conflict. So if he did think one, he would identify it. And we've had that on a couple occasions where, although that usually doesn't get to us because they stop it. We've had a couple of conflicts that we became aware of. So anyway, we look at to see that Mr. Whiting has signed the conflict, look briefly at the conflict, and especially at ones that are pretty clearly unrelated. So for instance, which one is this? This is looking at Damon Sherman Newsom. His brother apparently is going to do a presentation for literacy event for migrant education at Bartlett, and he is a student success coach, the actual employee. So that doesn't appear to be much of a connection that the ASD success coach doesn't have influence over this type of a contract. Probably didn't select it, doesn't administer it, and therefore there's no real tie there. Does that explain that to you?
So, his brother, Isaiah, has been talking about literacy event for the migration education. Is that the idea?
Yes, I believe so.
Okay.
And then, Dee, I believe there's one in there from
So maybe for Abrams, we should just go through these one by one.
Sure.
Show you. Okay, so the first one is was it the one I was just talking about? Yeah. So the April 1st one, Damon Sherman Newsom, a coach there, the brother is doing a literacy event. So that appears unrelated on its face. That, again, is whether the ASD employee has any control in selecting brother or administering the contract. And that seems unlikely. David Whiting said that as well. Signed off on this. So then the next one is Whitney Durantry or something, is a teacher, expert, instructional support, and this contract for spouses, paving and concrete. So again, it appears pretty unrelated. That teacher expert would have much to do with a paving contract. So, and again, if we want more information, we can ask for it, or you can ask for it. And then the next one, Allison Gordy. Our boards and commissions, when they first get on a board or commission, they also have to disclose any interest they have in a municipal contract or any interest that a family member has. And this person is saying Allison, she's going to be part of the Urban Design Commission. But number 3, neither I nor any member of my immediate family have a financial interest. So that's her disclosure. She does not. And so the next one is, let's see, Guy Wade. It's the interest in municipal contract. He's a board member of the Girdwood Board of Supervisors. And again, number 3, neither I nor any member have any interest. And then because the next one was the one we did same time, the request for advisory.
So it's those 4
Yep. That's it.
So Abram, did that make sense?
Yeah,
Those-
yeah,
okay.
I got it. Thank you, Dave. Appreciate that. Yeah.
I remember, the first time I looked at those, my eyes crossed. I was like,
These
what
forms
penny
to
for those
look at.
guys?
Yeah.
Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I'll move to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
I have an adjacent question, which is, I assume, I think it's not one of those forms, within 30 days of appointment to
Yes.
any other members who haven't yet, who are within 30 days of commencement of their service.
Have you ever filled out a form that says you or a family member have no interest in in a contract?
Well,
Let's
what
go
have
to
you-
my, let's go
would
to
be
my
this
website.
for?
I'll send one to you.
Okay, yeah, just send them to me.
Jennifer, is there a way for you to see if I read one? I don't think I did, but things were a little nutty when I.
I think you did too, but yes, I'll
I think I did too.
There's a
Thank you
pandemic.
for bringing that up.
Yeah, that'd be great. I don't remember anything. But Tom's like
So the consent agenda has passed.
And I don't know whether Becky needs to be re-sworn in or not. So I asked Barbara.
Did we do swear-ins? I don't know.
Yeah.
I got sworn in.
I got sworn in, I think we were last term, I got sworn in as municipal attorney, but that was when we were like re-upping the swearing in thing. I feel like she
Barbara has
got
come
more
here to do that.
enthusiastic
Yeah,
about swearing in.
yeah, Barbara has come here to do that. It might even say not vote.
I would love to get sworn in. It's not too
All
far.
right, well, let's find, could you
They
like
put it on the clerk's webpage and like keep it, or the Facebook page.
Oh, cool.
That's not what I was looking at.
So have we determined that none of us are actually here legitimately at this point? We weren't sworn in.
Pretty much.
This shows it.
COVID ruined something
But
else.
is there a paper copy of this somewhere? Or do I need to download them from the website to do?
I'll send them to you.
Okay, thank you.
But if you could ask Barbara, yeah, I think if it's legal department is something that helped her decide who needed it and who didn't, but I can't, but she would know this.
Well, we should do a group swearing in. Just I don't know,
That'd be
constitute
fun.
everyone.
That sounds like so much fun.
So our next item is 7C. This was Dee and Kelly on the update questions for 115-060E.
And can I break up? We don't
I agree,
get there in
yeah.
5 minutes, but for everybody else, what this was, or I guess Becky, I think you're maybe even more involved in this, I'm not sure. Our last meeting, we had a robust discussion. Felix Rivera came to me, and I wanted to do this anyway, because the questions that are laid out in code for how to determine if someone has a substantial financial interest that they disclose at the assembly are very difficult to understand. They have no idea what they're answering. You know, you can see I know what the potential conflict is, and they're like, nah, I don't think so. But anyway, to make more helpful questions based on sort of categories. So we were going to do a category, for instance, was employment by a family member, ownership in a business, so that you would go right down to those. And those don't have to be in code, but okay, here's a helpful handout to you that if this is the potential conflict, these are the questions you should ask, and the other 5 don't apply. So we started in that, but it surprisingly became a very robust circular discussion we did not get out of. And so we need to finish that. That's going to say a robust circular. So that I should send that to you ahead of time, so you can see sort of the categories we were talking about. But it's simply to assist the assembly in what is right now. Felix or someone will ask them the questions, they'll disclose something, and they look blankly at him and go,
Well, I love Amy. Amy was like their anchor.
Yeah.
Knowing how to do that.
But even like the questions are very difficult to understand. It's very, and like none of them understand, is this an interest shared by a large group of people, which is one of the most important factors, and they don't get that at all. I mean, I can hear them answering, and I know what the conflict is, and it's the wrong answer. I will say, Becky, just so you know, and Aaron too, is Terry and I, for during some of the more contentious periods of time of late, assembly members would call us prior to the assembly meeting and say, this is my conflict, and then we would get the chair, whoever's the chair or the vice chair on. We would discuss it ahead of time to find out what it is, what really should be asked, and what really mattered. And so it was just done informally, and therefore they were much better presented at the actual assembly meeting. And the ruling on whether there is a conflict or not, that is solely the Assembly's prerogative, as it is boards and commissions. Our issues with proper disclosure. So we don't, someone can't then send it to us and say, hey, I think that the Assembly made the wrong decision. We don't have jurisdiction, that's in our code. But we can be helpful because they're like, well, geez, we don't know, what's the answer here? And so we discuss the factors. So there's actually a fair amount of pre-assembly meeting advice going on by whoever the chair is, myself or Lisa. It hasn't been up late, but we had about 4 or 5 right in a row. And I can say this on the record. For instance, one of them was Chris Constant, who works for Aquila. Could he vote on the funding for that treatment center? Because Aquila might potentially in the future be an operator. So many steps were moved, but it was raised by other assembly people saying, no, he can't participate because he has an interest. So we walked through those steps, and that really, Felix determined based on what we were saying that it's too tangential. It's too many steps down the line because there had to be an RFP had to go out, someone had to be selected. So it's way down the line that potentially someone that Chris works for would become the operator, therefore he shouldn't. But there's a lot of that going on behind the scenes. But this would help clean that up, is instead of those 8 questions, 6 of which make no sense for any particular situation, to say here's categories. If it's employment, if it's, again, ownership in a business, and people also don't understand that if you're an employee in a business, for instance, you have an interest in what happens to that business. Like it's sort of an entity interest, or border, well, obviously if you're a director or something better. But anyway, to be much more helpful, like 4 categories. And again, we ended up really having a big discussion about it last time. We'll re-present it, for everybody and see if we can, come up with some helpful advice for the assembly.
Should we move that to next meeting? Okay. All right. Any member comments?
Just as a heads up, I will be telephonic in July. I'm working remotely from Florida for a week.
Good for you.
It will be hot. Well, I will be present telephonically.
And if I can bring up another thing, I don't know how many people here want to stay. Well, right now we're all back telephonic unless someone like that who has permission or back in person. I tonight am writing a modification to that code section that will provide for some of this flexibility, hopefully. And so we'll see. We can't just reverse because there's some other politics going on, but so we'll see. And so how people feel about that. I know most boards were very positive about it because it saves so much time in terms of commuting. And we did great. I thought our board did really great. It was not although this has been very pleasant to actually see people.
I like the binders too.
So how do people feel? I mean, if you had your choice, would you prefer telephonic or, just so I know, because I'm not getting the ordinance tonight.
Oh.
For teams, you
I mean,
Teams
like-
or in person.
I like being in person. It feels normal, I guess.
It'd be nice to have the option. I guess it's
Yeah,
like, I
hybrid.
prefer being in person, but it'd be nice to have.
The option
The
if
option.
necessary. What are the facilities like? Can you project a
TV.
person, or like, is that a
Yeah.
Teams or Zoom enabled station? Like, one of the things, we've been on a hybrid things at work, and it's the question of how do you equalize the participation of the telephonic number, but we have all these Teams enabled conference rooms, which here would you be on the phone if you were, or would we,
Yes.
can we can't project something into that?
I don't have the ability to do a hybrid right now, so if you're remote, then
Then
it's
you're on the phone.
telephonic.
Are you guys able to get good internet access there?
What if you, what if you just did like, not on Teams, but what if someone just like, I don't know, like FaceTime or something, and if that's just a video, I'm trying to think, there should be potentially a way to hook up,
Yeah.
like a
So
phone,
these
you
are
couldn't do
because-
document sharing that way, but there should be a way to get a person on video, maybe.
Yeah. I think we've been able to do document sharing even from hybrid meetings.
The clerk's office is not able to facilitate a hybrid meeting right now. We've explored that with the assembly. We need to get IT involved, so I can't give you that option right now. I'm not saying it's a never possibility, but just we're gonna be ready in July.
Well, that kind of incentivizes appearance in person too, because I feel like then you can telephonically appear if you absolutely have to, but it's not as convenient.
Can we just have, can we have the discretion to decide on a meeting by meeting basis whether we want to meet in person for a meeting or we want to do the next one by Teams? I mean, I think there is value in getting everybody together in person, at least for, on a staggered basis. But I also understand people's need for flexibility and discerning on.
Our problem with that was notice to the public, that you're making that decision days before a meeting. And you're also imposing a lot more work on staff. So it's sort of got to be a uniform rule, and I think that, again, people can call into board meetings. I'm not sure, actually, I have to look at this. For us, when we are doing an adjudicatory matter, like we were deciding whether you're allowed to do that telephonically.
So I think that we have to have quorum in person,
Oh, you have to have the quorum, right?
is my
Yeah.
understanding, but.
Well, one of the suggestions for the, this new ordinance, that I will be deciding on tonight, is to follow the assembly model, and the assembly model is as long as there's a quorum of people here, then there can be quorum. So that's gonna be the least, we're definitely gonna adopt that. But can we go further?
Be nice to give yourself the flexibility to.
I'm fine being in person, but flexibility, I mean, yeah.
It would seem like we'd have to make the decision, if we were to try and make it on any kind of meeting basis, we'd have to do it, like, we have to decide now for July, and because
Right.
the public notice requirement for like 2 weeks or something, granted, we'd have to at the very least.
Right.
Right.
We also,
I
we have
don't-
5 of us and we only need 3, right? So, I mean, if we want to decide on in person and it's the 3 people, as long as we get 3 people here.
We don't think we have the ability to meet remotely until that ordinance, until there's a change to code. So that's not gonna be done by the July meeting.
No. I think, yeah, July we're in
Okay.
person, except for Florida.
Yes. That
Sorry about that.
Sorry.
All right, next meeting, Wednesday, July 21. Any motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Great. Bang the umbrella.